Cancel student debt. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer, who's right there. How you doing, Chris?
Good.
And this podcast is called Cancel Student Debt. And we have a dumbest bill in America, which you are going to love it because it's really dumb. And we have a lot more to come after that as well. So this podcast is called Cancel Student Debt. Why? Well, Joe Biden was at a CNN town hall just a couple of days ago. And at that town hall, Joe Biden had some questions from people that were chosen by CNN, as always, to ask questions. And they were supposedly, randomly chosen. And one such question was about, shouldn't we cancel student debt? And the entitled attitude of this individual who asks the question, just watch really closely at her face. And Joe Biden, on the one hand, he disagrees with her about canceling as much student debt as she wants canceled, that she's demanding. But then, of course, Joe Biden gives in and says, how other things should be free. We're going to discuss that. But first, look really closely at how entitled this little snowflake is when she asks about her debt that she's responsible for whatever reason. You should pay for it, but not her. We have that clip, and here it is.
Loans are crushing my family, friends, and fellow Americans.
Me too.
The American dream is to succeed, but how can we fulfill that dream when debt is many people's only option for a degree? We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen.
Oh, whoa, Joe Biden, I will not make that happen. So first, of course, she says, we demand, we need at least $50,000 of forgiveness. So who pays for the forgiveness? The American taxpayers. So here's how that works, of course. So you have mountains of debt from college. You willingly chose to enter into that debt. When you went to college, you probably got a useless degree, which is probably why you can't repay that debt. I wouldn't be surprised. Not in every case, but in so many cases across this country. And what you want to do is to transfer that debt burden onto the American taxpayers at the federal level so that the federal government will then pass a bill that pays off $50,000 of your debt because you are entitled to that. You made the debt and you willingly entered into that debt, but that contract should be null and void. That contract should be assigned to the American people, and they should have to pay for it. So Joe Biden at least, grew some guts there, if you will, and said, I'm not going to do that. That's like way too much. But Biden then explains himself in the rest of the clip, which we will play in a minute, where he says, well, there are some things that should be free in higher ed. And this is the problem with Democrats is that initially they say no to their base, right? Because it's a completely unreasonable request to ask the American people to pay off your debts when you willingly made that debt. Did you have to go to college? No, you didn't have to go to college. Did you have to go to a four-year college? No, you didn't have to go to a four-year college either. But Joe Biden explains this and then kind of does a 180 so that he can at least kind of massage his woke left about this particular issue. But of course, with the left, it's never perfect, and we'll discuss AOC's reaction as well. So here's the rest of the clip. Here it is.
It depends on whether or not you go to a private university or a public university. It depends on the idea that I say to a community, I'm going to forgive the debt, the billions of dollars of debt for people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn and schools, my children. I went to a great school. I went to a state school. But is that going to be forgiven rather than use that money to provide for early education for young children who come from disadvantaged circumstances? But here's what I think. I think everyone, and I've been proposing this for 4 years, everyone should be able to go to community college for free. For free. That costs $9 billion, and we should pay for it. And the tax policies we have now, we should be able to pay for it. You spend almost that money as a break for people who own racehorses. And I think any family making under $125,000, whose kids go to a state university they get into, that should be free as well.
So there you go. So talk about, backpedaling. No, we're not going to forgive $50,000 of debt, but I think it should be free that if you go to a state university, that university should be free. What? That could be easily over $100,000 because many state universities are, by the time everything is included, $100,000. And then he says, well, community colleges should be free as well. So let's walk down this aisle a little bit. So let's just say state universities were free because the federal government has deemed it should be free. Well, what about the private schools? Why would anyone ever go to a private university or a private college ever if every single state university was free? That would be essentially the government putting its foot on the pedal of competition and saying, oh, well, these state schools are so great. We're going to make them free. And then, of course, everybody's going to flock to those and no one will go to the private schools. And then the private schools would do what? They would go away. They would disappear because they can't operate on no income. And so that's exactly what the Democrats want, podcast listeners. They actually want the failure of private universities. They want to see that because they want everything to be nationalized. They want everything to be the same. And in community colleges, there's no cheaper way to go to college, at least for the first 2 years, than to a community college. And if you do so, it is incredibly affordable. It's very affordable. You can work at the same time. You can go part-time. You could also go full-time. And then, yes, you could take on debt if you wanted to, but the debt would be quite manageable for a community college. Or you don't have to go to college at all, and you can learn all different kinds of trades. Many of those trades, by the way, are in technology itself, where you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree. But Joe Biden, of course, he does that whole backpedaling thing where it's like, no, yeah, I'm not going to pay for $50,000, but state universities and community colleges should be free. Folks, here's the thing. If you have entered into a contract and you've borrowed money to go to college and you really regret it, that's your fault. You know what? I'm sorry. It is your fault because there is a teaching moment when you make mistakes in life. Now, of course, I'm probably sounding like my father now, right? But what is that teaching moment? The teaching moment is you say to yourself, well, I'm not going to do that again. The next time I go into debt for anything, no matter what it is, whether it's a car, whether it's education, whether it's a house, whether it's, a boat or whether it's anything. Before I go into debt, I'm really going to evaluate whether I really need that thing and whether that thing brings to me the utility that's going to make my life better in the way that I anticipate that it will. But if the taxpayers pay for people's student debt up to $50,000, which is what almost all the Democrats want, let's face it, if that really were to happen, where's the teaching moment? There's no teaching moment. All you're going to do is say, well, great, the government bailed me out this time. Well, why wouldn't they bail me out the next time when I make the next big mistake taking on debt? And this is exactly the problem now in the United States of America. It is the road towards socialism by saying to people that they are not responsible for their decisions. And this is exactly what conservatism is about. It's like, look, we all make bad decisions. Look, podcast listeners, I've made some bad decisions economically myself. And boy, did I pay the price. I mean, huge price. Never once did it occur to me, never, to call up the federal government, like call up my congressman and say, hey, you know what you need to do? You need to put a bill in and you need to pay for my mistakes, the mistakes that I freely chose in life. You should pay for it. The taxpayer should pay for it. Not me. That's not my job. And when you look at this lady's expression, when she tells, Joe Biden, we need at least $50,000, she's so entitled. And I just would respect politicians so much more, no matter who they are, no matter what side of the aisle, if they would just stand up and say, you know what? You made the debt, you pay for it. So AOC, what does she do? AOC was so furious at Biden's response to this individual asking for $50,000 of debt forgiveness. So AOC goes, who cares what school someone went to? Entire generations of working class kids were encouraged to go into more debt under the guise of elitism. This is wrong. Nowhere does it say we must trade off early childhood education for student loan forgiveness. We can have both. And then, of course, she tweets out that conversation with the lady that asked for the $50,000 of debt forgiveness. And then, of course, Joe Biden's response. So it's classic AOC, right? There's no limit to what government can pay for. There's no limit to what government should pay for. And who cares what school you went to? It doesn't matter how bad your choice was because, you shouldn't be responsible for any of your actions in this life. It should always be socialized. All of your bad decisions should be socialized. And as I said, podcast listeners, if you're one of those persons that has college debt, which by the way, I do for my 3 children, I will tell you, yes, it is an enormous burden and I get it. And there are some things that can be done. Here's an example, right? One thing that we could do is have a massive refinance or encourage lenders to refinance those loans at much lower rates because most college loans are at very, very high rates. And so to the extent that we encouraged or provide some sort of incentives to the lending institutions to refinance those at lower rates, the American people would save, obviously many, many billions of dollars in interest charges over the life of the loan. That's probably the right way to go, but wiping out the student debt makes no sense whatsoever. So, kind of sort of good for you, Joe Biden, for standing up to it on the one hand, but then you vacillated right away and backed off, which is, classic Democrat. I'm sorry, that's just what they do. Anything they can do to buy off their base, they will most definitely do. So next up, podcast listeners, the Convention of States. I just want to talk about this briefly. In Maryland this week, we had a Convention of States event. And the Convention of States event was run by Stephen Patton and C. Harrison. Both of those individuals lead the Maryland Convention of States organization. Convention of States is a nationwide organization that calls for an Article 5 Convention of States so that the federal government can be pushed back, particularly in the areas of term limits, right? They want to put term limits in the Constitution. They want to amend the Constitution to also stop the federal overreach into the state's business and into individual lives. And also they want to stop the out-of-control spending. And so Mark Meckler is ahead of this organization, and I just learned that Mark Meckler was named the interim CEO of Parler, which is really cool. So I'm really proud to be the individual in the state of Maryland who has shepherded this particular bill in the legislature in Maryland, the Convention of States bill. I'm really proud to have done that, and I'm really proud of the fact that there are individuals in this group, and they have so many members statewide and also nationwide, so many great members, and they are patriots, and all they want is their country back. And by that, I mean they want a limited federal government. They want a smaller federal government. They want decisions made at the state and local level, and they just want the federal government out of their lives. And it makes perfect sense. And I have a great example for you as to, what the federal government does and how they mess up things. So in Texas, there is a power outage that has been going on because of a massive ice storm, right? So there's a winter storm. There are winter storms all the time, right? And you have to expect that if you are a power company or if you are a state. But because the federal government engaged in massive tax credits and guarantees to wind farms, the state of Texas was all in and decided to allow these farms through zoning, naturally, and these wind farms were built throughout the state of Texas. So much so that 25% of the grid in Texas is fed by electricity that is generated by wind turbines. Only one problem. When the wind turbines froze up as a result of all of the ice and freezing rain, which was quite frankly a pretty massive storm in Texas, all of that electricity on the grid went away. Imagine that. It's not reliable. Wind turbines actually aren't reliable. Yet we were told by the left that as a result of climate change, which is an existential threat, we must build wind turbines all over the country, and by doing so, it will save the planet. Well, how do you save the planet if you're dead? because you freeze to death. And that's exactly what's happening in Texas right now. So, by the way, none of this would be invested in if the federal government didn't create this incredibly ridiculous tax incentive, as I said. So there is an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it's actually an opinion piece by the editorial board. And I want to read some of this because it speaks to the really distortion that's existing in federal policy that people like the Convention of States are fighting against, and why we want the federal government to go back to its core responsibility and stay the heck out of state decisions. So the opinion piece from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal is entitled "The Political Making of a Texas Power Outage." And here it goes. "We are millions of Americans in the nation's most energy-rich state without power, Texas, and no heat for days amid extreme winter weather. The people who have fallen short with regard to the power are the private power generation companies," said Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Yes, blame private power companies, but aren't they regulated by the government? Yes, they are. The Republican sounds like California's Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom, who lambasted private utilities for rolling blackouts during a heat wave last summer in California. Power grids should be able to withstand extreme weather, but in both these bellwether states, state and federal energy policies have created market distortions and reduced grid reliability. Governor Abbott blamed his state's extensive power outages on generators freezing early Monday morning, noting this includes the natural gas and coal generators. But frigid temperatures and icy conditions have descended on most of the country. Why couldn't Texas handle them while other states did? Great question. The problem is Texas's over-reliance on wind power that has left the grid more vulnerable to bad weather. Half of wind turbines in Texas froze last week, causing wind's share of electricity to plunge to 8% from 42%. Power prices in the wholesale market in Texas spiked because there wasn't enough power, and grid regulators on Friday warned of rolling blackouts. Natural gas and coal generators ramped up to cover the supply gap, but couldn't meet the surging demand for electricity, which half of households rely on the heating, even as many families powered up their gas furnaces. Then some gas wells and pipelines froze. In short, there was not sufficient baseload power from coal and nuclear power plants to support the grid. Baseload power is the reliable power that is needed to stabilize the grid during difficult times, during supply and demand issues, especially when there are storms. When there's not enough baseload power, the grid gets unbalanced and power sources can fail. The more the grid relies on intermittent renewables like wind and solar, the more baseload power is needed to back them up. So therein lies the problem, ladies and gentlemen. We have a federal government that has incentivized the growth of solar farms and these massive wind turbine farms in places like Texas and certainly elsewhere. And no one would ever invest in these farms if it weren't for the massive federal tax breaks, the massive subsidies at the federal level, and in many cases at the state level. And so what have we done? We don't realize that when they are built, we actually need more reliable grid power just to offset the ridiculous amounts of intermittent power being unreliable power that only works when it's windy or when it is sunny. And we see now in the state of Texas what happens when something that you didn't expect, that not only is there no wind to speak of, and even if there is, it wouldn't matter because the turbines are frozen solid and they can't even move. So as a result, people have died in the state of Texas because of government, and specifically because of the federal government, first and foremost, trying to scare the living heck out of people about existential threat of climate change, and then having people invest in something that makes heating and electricity and cooling less reliable This is what the federal government, so the Convention of States people, I got to tell you, they were here this week. That's where I started out this segment on. And those people are patriots because I talked to this issue this past week to the Convention of States folks and just said, this Texas power outage is a great example of federal policy that is literally destroying the country. And that's why that's one of the major reasons, one of the great examples in modern American history why our federal government needs to be pushed back and why it needs to be smaller and why it needs to stay the hell out of the state's business. Because I don't think many states would ever engage in this kind of, chicanery whatsoever if it weren't for the federal government's tax incentives. So next up, podcast listeners, a Democrat files a lawsuit against Donald Trump, and there are many more to follow. So as you know, the President of the United States was acquitted a second time. He was impeached twice, but acquitted twice as well, which means he wasn't found guilty. That doesn't matter to the Democrats. Now that they have failed, and they're starting to put into place a lot of private lawsuits, and filing them all over the country to do what? To hold the president accountable for what happened in January, namely the break-in of the Capitol. So the AP says the following: House Homeland Security Chairman accused Donald Trump in a federal lawsuit Tuesday of inciting the deadly insurrection at the Capitol and conspiring with his lawyer and extremist groups to try to prevent Congress from certifying the results of the presidential election that he lost to Joe Biden. The lawsuit from Democrat Representative Benny Thompson is part of an expected wave of litigation over the January 6th riot and is believed to be the first filed by a member of Congress. They just can't let it go. Right? They just can't, it's like, okay, Donald Trump lost the election. Joe Biden is president. He's living in the White House. Kamala Harris, of course, is vice president. She was elected, but they just can't let this go. The Democrats can't. They have to keep this alive because it's the only way to keep their base in a complete fury over the fact that Trump might come back. So they're trying to ruin him. They're trying to cancel him, not just while he was president of the United States. They're trying to cancel his entire business and to ruin him as much as they can. And you have to ask yourself the question, what kind of a person has the mental capacity to really do that, right? He lost, okay? He's out of the White House. You got your way. You impeached him twice. No president has been impeached twice. You got your way, but it's still not enough. So there's a press conference with Jen Psaki, of course, at the White House, and a reporter asked Jen Psaki about this very issue. Like, well, now that he's been acquitted, don't you think the Department of Justice should go after him as a private citizen? I mean, it's just unbelievable stuff. I mean, how is this helpful to our country? How does this heal our country? If you really are that person who thinks, our country needs to be brought together, but Donald Trump needs to be arrested. If you're that person, then you have a mental health problem. You really do. So we have that clip with Jen Psaki. First, the reporter asks the question, and then she answers it, and they kind of go back and forth. And here it is.
Conviction. He cited Mitch McConnell believed that Donald Trump was guilty of a disgraceful dereliction of duty, practically and morally responsible for provoking the violence unleashed on the Capitol. So if he wasn't convicted through an impeachment trial via Congress, via the Senate, how should a president who commits acts that President Biden says are not in dispute be punished?
Well, I think obviously there was a process that worked its way through the Senate. That's why we put out a statement on Saturday evening.
Does he support criminal prosecution?
That will be up to the Department of Justice to determine. We're doing something new here, and there's going to be an independent Justice Department to determine what any path forward and any investigation would look like.
Absent this president's actions, though, do you think, does something like this, does it seem, Mitch McConnell left that door open to criminal prosecution. Would actions like this, do they meet the bar for criminal prosecution?
I am not going to speculate on criminal prosecution from the White House podium.
Can you imagine? So this, first of all, it's a fair question. I'm glad the question was asked to Jen Psaki. But you see Jen Psaki, she's doing the old sidestep there, right? So I don't know what they're going to do over there at the Department of Justice. We have nothing to do with that. Meanwhile, of course, they're appointed by Joe Biden naturally, and they work for him. But that's what makes this so ridiculous, right? You have a president who lost, and he's out of the White House. You have your guy in, but it's still not enough. You have to go and ruin a former president of the United States. And here's where the danger lies, podcast listeners. 74 million people voted for Donald Trump. I don't think they're particularly happy with the results of the election for a variety of reasons, which we've discussed many times in this podcast before. But they're going to be really upset if there is any attempt to try to put this former president in handcuffs and say, oh, I'm sorry, you are responsible for people breaking into the Capitol, and you are responsible for the fact that you dared to challenge the results of the election, okay? It's just not a really smart move, I think, on the Democrats' part, but they can't help themselves because it's really what you do to keep, in politics, you have politicians, many of them, not all, but many of them are hacks, right? And all they want to do is to keep their base really stirred up and to make the base convinced that you have to destroy your opponent rather than just defeat them in the election. And that's part of the problem here, right? We have people that think it's okay to ruin people's lives rather than, and by the way, also ruin the country. Because you have a divided country, this approach doesn't bring us together. It makes us further apart, and it has got to stop. It really does. And that's Dem Files' lawsuit against Donald Trump, and probably a lot more lawsuits to follow. So get this, podcast listeners. Worth Avenue is in Palm Beach, Florida, right? So you have West Palm Beach, Florida, and in that area of Florida, which is South Florida, there's an avenue that's called Worth Avenue. I've always liked that name, right? It's like worth because you're worth a lot if you can live in that area. No doubt about it. Certainly you're worth a lot if you can afford a house in that area. And there are many famous people that own homes there that are worth, $100 million. And this is no kidding. In some cases, even more, especially with the South Florida real estate market going through the roof. But Worth Avenue is replacing Fifth Avenue in New York, because Fifth Avenue, of course, has traditionally been the place that when people go to New York, they're like, let's go down Fifth Avenue and just like browse and look in the windows and all that stuff, because you have all the really expensive shops like Tiffany and Rolex, and you just name the store and I'm sure it's there on Fifth Avenue. Only one problem: many of those retailers, small, medium, and large, are moving to Worth Avenue in Palm Beach, Florida. Isn't that interesting? So we have an article from CNBC. It says retailers trade Fifth Avenue for Worth Avenue as Palm Beach scene thrives with Americans heading south. No surprise there. Retailers, restaurants, and other business owners are opening up around Palm Beach, Florida, eyeing tax and lifestyle perks as many more people look to call South Florida home during the COVID pandemic and maybe even beyond. Retail rents are rising in the Palm Beach area, a sign that demand for space is picking up and supply is more constrained than in places like New York City. New York-based developer Related Companies has played a key role in helping to develop the retail scene in downtown West Palm in South Florida with its Rosemary Square project. So, some are taking temporary retreat during the COVID pandemic, away from the cold weather up north. Others are making a longer-term change, and businesses are following by committing to decades-long leases. I never even knew that was a thing. You could sign decades-long leases. At Rosemary Square, a fancy outdoor shopping mall situated close to downtown West Palm Beach, a West Elm furniture store and Urban Outfitters are slated to open in the coming months. They'll be joined by a slew of new restaurants, including recently opened local fast casual taco shop, health-driven chain True Food Chicken, and the hip plant-based restaurant Planta. So you can tell like a lot of these, Northeasterners are moving down there because they're demanding these like really new woke places. And please don't mess up Florida when you move there from the Northeast. Lucid Motors, an electric car company known as a Tesla competitor, opened its second South Florida location last month at Rosemary Square, which is operated by New York-based developer Related Companies. It joined Lululemon, Anthropologie, Yeti, Tommy Bahama, Sur La Table, RH, and more than a dozen other retailers that on most weekends are filled with visitors. So, of course, the takeaway from this, not really a surprise, but so many people are moving to South Florida, people with money, that you have almost a replacement that is going on in real time of Fifth Avenue, New York, and it's being supplanted in and on Worth Avenue in South Florida. Really something, right? I mean, when do you ever remember something like this happening in your lifetime? You might have new areas that open up that are really fancy and expensive in different states or different cities, but those are growth areas where they're in addition to Fifth Avenue. But here we have a situation where New York State and New York City are so poorly governed that people are just like, you know what? I'm not just going to move, but I want all those stores that are on Fifth Avenue, I want those to move with me. And the restaurants and the hotels and the stores are saying, sure, sounds good to me. I mean, why not? And so that is Worth Avenue replaces Fifth Avenue. So next up, podcast listeners, some Virginia students, in Fairfax County in particular, returned to the classroom, but not the teachers. Let me say this again. In Virginia, some students have returned to in-classroom learning, but the teacher isn't there. That's because the students have their laptop in front of them, like me, and they're learning via Zoom, but sitting in the classroom, and there's no teacher because the teachers don't want to go back to work in Fairfax County. It's the most ridiculous thing I have ever seen. So this was reported in a number of different publications. I'm going to read it from the Gateway Pundit. So it says, this is abusive and insane. Some students returned to the classroom in Fairfax County, Virginia on Tuesday for in-person learning, but they're still learning virtually in the classroom. So they're sitting in the classroom learning virtually. Each masked student is in a different class with a different teacher who's teaching from home. The teacher is from home teaching while the kid is in the classroom. The teachers have been vaccinated, but are refusing to return to the classroom. Fairfax County Public Schools began vaccinating teachers and staff 2 weeks ago. Instead of teachers actually teaching the students, Fairfax County Public Schools instead hired monitors to be in the classroom with the students because the teachers didn't want to go back to work. And then the monitors just sit up front while the kid is learning from Zoom online in the classroom, but the teacher is at home. So can you imagine? It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I mean, how can parents not see through this nonsense of how crazy this is? So Governor Desantis decided to take on the teachers' unions, and he decided to take on this whole issue of in-classroom learning during COVID. And he literally just had a press conference about this. And we have a couple of clips on this, and this is really worth listening to because it goes right to the heart of what is happening in the rest of the country versus what is happening in Florida. So here's Governor Desantis on keeping schools open. Here's the first clip. Here it is.
We've been open the whole time since August. We had kids doing camps and athletics and all that over the summer. And we've been in person as much as anybody in the country. And yet, we're 34th out of 50 states in DC for COVID-19 cases on a per capita basis for children. 33 states have more cases per capita than Florida for children per capita. And many of those don't have a lot of in-person instruction in school. And so there is no evidence to suggest that school kids should do anything else other than be in school. This has been clear for months and months and months.
So Florida's kids have been in school since September. And that's Governor Desantis coming on the national stage really for the first time and in a press conference and talking about the broader issue of public education in America and the state of public education in America during COVID, and showing how different states have dealt with this issue differently. And Florida, as he said, there are 33 states, many of which do not have children in the classroom at all, that have a higher rate of COVID with children that have COVID than Florida. And so, DeSantis actually reads the science, and he also understands the other unintended consequences of children not being in the classroom. And we know what those are: mental health issues, drug use, depression, just go right down the list. And not to mention, parents who are stressed out because they want to get back to work and their children are home and they're frustrated because they're sitting in front of a computer for hours and hours at a time. So DeSantis, we have two more clips from DeSantis from this particular press conference. And DeSantis says, you know what reopen school plans should look like? Well, we have that clip. Here it is.
The school reopening plan that makes the most sense, if you want to open schools, open them. Open the door. Let them come in and let them learn. And the only reason that that is not happening across this country, like it is in Florida, like it is in a handful of other states, it's one reason and one reason only. Because the Democratic Party puts the interests of education unions and special interests ahead of the well-being of our children and of our families.
This guy needs to be president of the United States. I'm just saying, this is me, okay? This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials saying, I want Governor DeSantis to be the president of the United States because he is practicing what he's preaching in his own state, one of the largest states in the country, and he's saying it the way it is. You know what your plan should be for reopening schools? Just open them. Have kids come back. Tell the teachers to go back. Tell the teachers union to pound sand. Tell them this is their job. Don't pay them if they're not going to come back. I'm sorry. I believe that. I believe that at this particular point in time, if you are vaccinated, right, and you are a teacher and you're still refusing to go back into the classroom, you need to find another job. It's pretty straightforward. And that's pretty much what DeSantis is saying at this incredibly terrific press conference. So we have the final clip from DeSantis where he's showing his outrage of students who still aren't in the classroom. And we have that clip, and here it is.
These kids have been out of school in parts of this country for almost a year. And if you follow that CDC guidance, they will not go back in this school year, and they may not even go back in the fall. That is a disgrace. That is not science. That is putting politics ahead of what's right for kids. That is putting politics and special interests ahead of what the evidence and observed experience says. So we're better off as a result of giving parents and kids that opportunity. I can tell you, I cannot go out without a parent coming up to me saying how much better it is that their child's able to go to school. And so we're not looking back. We're going to continue going forward.
So yes, this is a great, great press conference because this press conference has established the governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, as, in my opinion, the front runner for president of the United States moving forward. I really do believe that. I've actually believed that for a long time. But giving this press conference and talking about the broader issue of schools being closed across the country versus what Florida is doing, it's so incredibly timely. And the issue couldn't be more clear. You are either with the teachers' unions at this particular point in American history, or you are with the parents and the students. There is no middle ground here. There really isn't. And that's exactly what DeSantis said. So in the Wall Street Journal, Jason Riley has a piece and it's entitled, Have Teachers' Unions Finally Overplayed Their Hands? Just going to read a couple paragraphs of this because it's terrific. Perhaps it doesn't receive much attention anymore because it's become so commonplace. The best schools in New York State are, again, public charter schools. Ho-hum. According to the most recent data from School Digger, a website that aggregates test score results, 23 of the top 30 schools in New York in 2019 were actually charter schools. The feat is all the more impressive because those schools sported student bodies that were more than 80% Black and Hispanic, and some 2/3 of the kids qualified for free or discount lunches. The Empire State's results were reflected nationally. In a U.S. News and World Report ranking released the same year, 3 of the top 10 public high schools in the United States were charter schools, as were 23 of the top 100. Even though charters made up only 10% of the nation's 24,000 public high schools. So think about that. Hardly any charter schools across the country. Very, very few. And yet they make up a disproportionate share by far of some of the best schools in the country. And they're educating the students for the most part, who have the worst opportunities in inner cities and are having the best results by far. So if you're a teachers union member, I'm sure you're afraid of competition. I'm sure you're afraid of charter schools. But you know what? That's because you're making it about yourself. You're not making it about the children, and you're sure as heck not making it about the parents and their families. And that, ladies and gentlemen, has got to change. It really is the civil rights issue of our time. And that is, some Virginia students return to the classroom, but not the teachers. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. Do we have a lead up, Mr. Assistant Producer?
Of course.
Actually, he's the producer. Let's hear it. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is from Senator Arthur Ellis of the state of Maryland. He's a state senator, and his bill renames a racist highway. That's the dumbest bill in America. Well, what is he trying to do? Well, there's a highway in Maryland called Indian Head Highway. Indian Head Highway. Indian Head Highway leads to a place called Indian Head, Maryland, and then eventually dead ends into a naval base known as Indian Head Naval Base. So here's the history. There's a town in Charles County, Maryland. The population is 3,844. It's called Indian Head, Maryland. It has been the site of a naval base specializing in gun and rocket propellants since 1890. Think about that. Since prior to the Spanish-American War, they were making propellants and test them there, and they still do. And it's a very large base. It's on the Potomac River. Indian Head Highway is a highway, as you would expect any highway to look like. It's like 3 lanes going in either direction in some cases, maybe more. And it takes you from kind of Washington, D.C., all the way down to Indian Head Naval Base. And there's a little town outside the naval base called Indian Head, Maryland. Well, State Senator Arthur Ellis wants to cancel that because Indian Head is a racist name. It's a racist highway. Well, we have some clips from State Senator Arthur Ellis, and he actually presented his bill. And he presented this bill quite recently, like just a few days ago, to tell you the truth. And we have some clips from it. We really, really want you to listen to what he's trying to do here. So here's the first clip. Listen.
Arthur Ellis, representing District 28, Charles County. I'm here to present Senate Bill 213 to you. It's a simple bill, 1 page, 2 lines. Original intent of this bill was to rename Route 210, the Indian Head Highway, to the President Barack Obama Highway.
That's it. So now you got it, right? So Arthur Ellis wants to rename Indian Head Highway because it's a racist highway, but he wants to rename it to President Barack Obama Highway, because that's what you have to do. So The Hill has an article about this. His new Maryland bill would rename Indian Head Highway to President Barack Obama Highway. State senators in Maryland recently introduced legislation that seeks to rename Indian Head Highway after former President Obama. Senate Bill 213, introduced by Democrat State Senator Arthur Ellis and Obie Patterson, would require the Maryland State Highway Administration to designate the highway, also known as Maryland Route 210, as the President Barack Obama Highway. The change would cost roughly $12,500 to cover the cost for design, construction, and installation of the new signs for the highway, which runs through parts of Maryland and Washington, D.C. If passed, the legislation would take effect in October. According to a local Fox affiliate, the highway was named after a town it also runs along named Indian Head, which, of course, is true, as I just read to you, because I'm very familiar with this town and I'm very familiar with the highway itself. The resolution stated that the town received its name due to the strong presence of indigenous persons in the late 17th century, specifically of the Algonquin tribe. Also very true. Many, many tribes were in that part of Maryland, particularly in southern Maryland. State Senator Ellis went on to state that the name may be deemed offensive to indigenous persons and urged the town to be renamed to better reflect the state of Maryland's respect of indigenous history, culture, and persons. So we have another series of clips from Arthur Ellis at his bill hearing. And we have another clip from him, and here it is.
A lot of us familiar with a lot of his achievements, and including the Nobel Prize, and just tremendous legacy. For 8 years, no conflict in his administration, just a person most of us believe we could be very proud of. Next slide.
So that was Arthur Ellis. He was giving a PowerPoint slide presentation via Zoom because the state of Maryland isn't holding in-person hearings for bills that are being presented. The bills have to be presented via Zoom because you might get COVID. And so therefore he offers a presentation via PowerPoint, right? So and so one of his slides that you just saw is, and here are all the achievements of Barack Obama. And his administration had like no controversy whatsoever. I mean, the Affordable Care Act and, all these other great, he won a Nobel Peace Prize. For what? For what? I mean, so there's another state senator on that committee. Her name is State Senator Benson. She's actually a very nice person. Well, she asked a question to State Senator Arthur Ellis about his bill. She's not exactly sold on the idea. And she's also Black, which I think is quite interesting. But listen to her reasons why she's not crazy about the idea. Kind of funny. We have that clip, and here it is.
Now listen, 210 is a worry for all of us in the metropolitan area. The highway is probably one of the most dangerous highways in the metropolitan area. And I do worry just a little bit about that. Do you think that renaming this highway will help to improve, first of all, the perception of 210? Of course, a lot of construction is taking place there. We've done every trick in the book relative to 210. I'm just wondering how this is going to help to promote the image of 210 because it does not have a good reputation. Do you think that will help?
Thank you for that question, Senator Benson, and for your knowledge of that highway. The worst highway in Maryland, just a lot of terrible accidents, a lot of issues that I must say we've worked on here in Annapolis in authorizing speed cameras on that road. The county has really dedicated, Prince George's County and Charles, a lot of resources on that road to fix it. So, the thing is, we have an opportunity to rebrand that road.
So that's State Senator Ellis responding to a question. And the question was, of course, posed by State Senator Benson, whom you also saw at the beginning, where she asked the question, are you sure you want to rename the highway after President Barack Obama, given the fact that there are like tons of really serious accidents and fatalities on this highway, which, by the way, is true. Are you sure you want to rename it after President Barack Obama? I mean, why would you kind of want to do that? The highway is really dangerous. and if you do rename the highway after President Barack Obama, will it get safer? And so State Senator Arthur Ellis responds, and he's like, well, I mean, you're right. It is like really a dangerous highway. I mean, we try to do a lot of things to make it safer, but it is really dangerous. So he's admitting that he's trying to rename a highway after Barack Obama, which is a dead-end highway. It is. It dead ends into a naval base and goes nowhere beyond that because it's bound by the Potomac River, and it's a dangerous highway. And so I was thinking, well, maybe Obama, like if it was named after him, he could get some drones and do some drone strikes on the highway to stop all those dangerous cars, and that would make it safer, So we also have a final clip on this bill, this dumbest bill. And this gentleman's name is Rico Newman. So he signed into Zoom to ask some questions and also to provide his testimony, really, about this bill. Very interesting. So Rico Newman actually is speaking on behalf of the Piscataway Indian tribe. He is himself a Native American, or at least part Native American. I don't know which tribe he belongs to or is from, to be honest with you. But nonetheless, he has history trying to, preserve Indian heritage and so forth, which, good for him. So he speaks and provides his opinion and quite frankly, doesn't seem to support the idea. And you'll never guess why. It's unbelievable. We have that clip, and here it is.
We are happy that many things have happened, both in Prince George and Charles County, both with the ending of the professional football team's name, getting rid of Columbus Day, being changed to Indian Heritage Day. But we don't want nails put in our coffin to where we disappear from plain sight.
Did you catch that? So he's like, I think it's good that we got rid of the Washington Redskins because, that's really a bad name, the Washington Redskins. And I think it's really good that we got rid of Columbus Day. Here they are. It's like, but he goes on to say, but I don't want to make Indians or Native Americans erased from history because right now we have a highway named after Indians, right? It's called Indian Head Highway. And if we erase that name and replace it with Barack Obama Highway, then the presence of Native Americans kind of disappears, seeing that that region of Maryland had many, many different tribes and that were very active and many cultural resources that are in those areas as a result. So what he's saying is talking out of both sides of his mouth. I love the fact that we canceled the Redskins. I love the fact that we canceled other people's holidays, like Columbus Day, because, God forbid, the Italian Americans can't have a holiday that is uniquely American as well. But at the same time, I don't want it to be Barack Obama Highway because then you're canceling Native Americans. I mean, unbelievable. I love it when the left eats itself alive. That's what they're doing in this particular hearing, So that has to be, Arthur Ellis, probably one of the dumbest legislators in the state of Maryland. I'm sorry, because this is what he's focusing on, right? This is what he's focusing on, renaming a highway. And that is the dumbest bill in America, renaming a racist highway. And that is it from Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. I want to thank our producer, Christopher Hopkins, for being here and always taking good care of us. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Very soon, we'll be back on Parler because Parler will be up and running again, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.